Today I want to do a review of the AP Lit video on AP's YouTube site, the seventh one, where the teachers there are talking about a thesis. If you haven't watched it yet, I recommend it. It's about 45 minutes long, maybe 15-20 minutes of it is worthwhile stuff, so there's a little bit to sift through. So I'll try and be a little more succinct in this one. Anyway, there's a link in the bottom corner here, bit.ly/aplit_videos. That will bring you directly to the YouTube site. Okay, so I want to first talk about the rubric, and this is the rubric that'll be used to evaluate your AP Lit essay in a few weeks. It's the prose fiction argument. The first part here is this, so they call it row A. So the first category is the thesis, right? And there's a reason that it's first. This is what drives your whole essay. If you don't really have a thesis, you don't really have anything to write about. So it's pretty important, right? The second is row B, evidence and commentary. It's from 0 to 4 points. And as you read through this, you'll notice that this is all stuff that's important to support your thesis. So if you don't have a thesis, you really struggle to, for example, provide specific evidence to support all claims in a line of reasoning because you don't really know what you're writing about. The last one is the row C, sophistication, and demonstrates sophistication of thought and/or develops a complex literary argument. Well, that all shows up in your thesis, right? So your thesis is really the most important thing. It's the thing that everything follows from. It's the reason it's row A, not just because you normally put it in your introduction, but because that's what really directs your whole essay. So how do we define a thesis? Well, first, how do you get the point for the thesis? You respond to the prompt with a thesis that presents a defensible interpretation of the passage, right? So two elements of that. First, you respond to the prompt. Secondly, you have a defensible interpretation, right? And so you make an interpretation, which is not just, right? That means you decide on some meaning. You say, this is what this means. And then this is something you can defend. And it's not just a summary, right? A summary is not an interpretation, and there's no real point in defending it because you can't. I mean, it's just what it is. You can't argue against it either. Okay, so how do we define a thesis? And this kind of is a little bit of a paraphrase of the video. We see a thesis is a statement that conveys a defensible claim about an interpretation of literature and that establishes a line of reasoning. So the different parts of this. First, the defensible claim. Right, this is, you are arguing something about the interpretation of literature, right? So that interpretation of literature is the meaning that you get from it. So your thesis statement has the argument about your interpretation of literature. In order to do this, you actually have to have an interpretation. You have to say what some meaning is. Finally, establishes the line of reasoning. And this is the part that kind of, how is it that you're supporting your interpretation? And this is something we'll talk more about tomorrow because we're going to look at a video about establishing a line of reasoning. Okay. So the homework, quote unquote, homework from the video was this. If you haven't had a chance to get the Google Doc that has this on it, I recommend doing that now. You go ahead and pause and get that Google Doc up. You might want to, if you haven't had a chance to read or to watch the video, you might want to do that now too. Okay, so this is write a thesis for the 2019 prompt. And this is the open prompt about a novel, right? So it's not about a piece of prose, a short piece of prose fiction. It's about a whole novel. Okay, so in his 2004 novel Magic Seeds, V.S. Naipaul writes, "It is wrong to have an ideal view of the world. That's where the mischief starts. That's where everything starts unraveling. Either from your own reading or from the list below, choose a work of fiction in which a character holds an ideal view of the world." Fine. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how the author's portrayal of this idealism and its positive or negative consequences contributes to an interpretation of the work as a whole. Do not merely summarize the prompt. Okay, so the question becomes, what is this prompt asking? Now, yes, we would need to find a work of fiction, right? It's asking for that. It's asking for a character with an ideal view of the world, and it's asking for an interpretation of the work as a whole, right? And we can see that in here, right? In a well-written essay, analyze the author's portrayal of this idealism, right? And we get that from here, a character who holds an ideal view of the world, and its positive or negative consequences, how they contribute to an interpretation of the work as a whole. Do not merely summarize the plot. Okay, so that's what we're looking for, those three things. The other way we can talk about it is the way that we have talked about it in class, which is, what is your interpretation of the work as a whole, and how does a character's idealism contribute to that interpretation? All right, so think about the novels that we've read this year. I'm pretty sure you could write this about Beloved, or All the Pretty Horses, or Great Expectations, or The Tempest, or The Handmaid's Tale, really. Probably anything but The Namesake. I'm not sure you could do about The Namesake. You could try. Okay, so pause, and I want you to go ahead and try and write a thesis about one of those things. And your thesis should say what the work of fiction is, say who the character and what their ideal view of the world is, and have an interpretation of the whole, right? So what is your interpretation of the work? How does that character's idealism contribute to that interpretation? You should go ahead and pause and write that. And when you're done, let's take a look at what I came up with. All right, so I decided to do All the Pretty Horses because it's my favorite of those, right? Remember, I wanted to figure out what my interpretation of the work as a whole was and how a character's idealism contributes to that interpretation. So I wrote, in Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses, John Grady Cole's belief in an idealistic life on a ranch as a cowboy in Mexico leads him to discover that the world is an unyielding and brutal place that cares not for the lives of its inhabitants. Okay, I just came up with that. So my interpretation of the work as a whole, right? It's that the world is an unyielding and brutal place that cares not for the lives of its inhabitants. How does a character's idealism contribute to that interpretation? Well, his belief in this idealistic life as a cowboy in Mexico, his idealism leads him to discover this. Okay, and we would go on and show in all the different ways that this is the case. And there we go. I answered the three things from the slide before. I looked at, I said it was a work of fiction, what the work of fiction was. I identified the character with that ideal view of the world, and I gave my interpretation of the work as a whole. Right? I answered what, and I answered how. Okay? If you have any questions, feel free to email me. You know my email address. Otherwise, I will provide... Oh, you can also see me in my office hours. Otherwise, I will provide another video tomorrow. All right? Check you later.